welcome to Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. I'm Pastor Shafer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive. And each week we bring to you an interesting person from around the community, around the nation, even around the world, to discuss the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. My guest today is the Rev Dr Karoline Lewis, who is professor of preaching at Lutheran Theological Seminary, which is in St. Paul, Minnesota. Welcome, Karoline.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you, Eric.
Tell our viewers who may not even know much about Lutheran Seminary, but tell our viewers a little bit about what your teaching and administrative work looks like at the seminary.
Sure. So Lutheran Seminary is, as you said, in St. Paul, Minnesota, at Twin Cities, Minnesota. And it's about, I think we are at 11 right now today in the frozen tundra up here. Lutheran Seminary is the largest of the Lutheran ELCA Lutheran seminaries. And I'm actually a graduate of Lutheran Seminary, and as are 7 of my other family members. So I have long ties back to Luther, can trace them back. Yeah, exactly. And as you said, I am a professor of biblical preaching at Luther, and I've been here for 15 years. And I also am the program director for the Festival of Homiletics, which is brought to you by Luther Seminary, and then oversee much of workingpreacher.org, which I think maybe many of your people might be familiar with, that website that comes along working preachers and helps them in commentaries and that daily and weekly preparation of their sermons. So that's what I'm up to here at Luther.
All right. So, to tell the truth to our viewers from Mount Olive, I use Working Preacher a lot for sermons, and you probably heard biblical reflections from Dr. Lewis in my sermons over the years, always with credit. Yes, it's a very helpful site. I don't know if our viewers know about the Festival of Homiletics. I've attended that. It's a very interesting event. So it's a youth gathering for pastors to talk about preaching, right?
Exactly. So we're going into our 30th anniversary this year.
Wow.
And started by David Howell 30 years ago, recognizing that that's what pastors might want, is to get together and hear some good preaching, talk about preaching, hear reflections and lectures, presentations about preaching, and to really, to inspire them and to a little bit of motivation in their craft, but also to pause and think about what they're up to and why it's so important to take a little bit of time outside of our schedules to hone that craft and to think about it in a really intentional way. So it's about 15 to 2,000 preachers that gather from all over the country, Canada, all over the world, actually. And we bring in as they say, the brightest and best preachers that we know of that are out there preaching, who are out there preaching these days. Huge diversity in gender and race and denominations. So it's an ecumenical gathering of the preachers who present and then the preachers who are there. So it's pretty inspiring and worship and great to be together. And we'll be together again after a 2-year hiatus with the pandemic again in Denver. So we're really excited about that.
Wow. And what's the website, Karoline, if they want to know more about the Festival of Homiletics?
Sure. festivalofhomiletics.org.
That's a pretty easy one.
Yeah.
And for those who may not be acquainted with this churchy word homiletics, it means preaching.
It does mean preaching. Fancy word means preaching. Yep.
And we always have to translate. I'm acutely aware of that, as you know, with my communication background, that try to get language that people will understand. So you've been at this for a while. You've been at teaching, preaching. You've been at seminary. As you look at your life in 2022, what are the challenges in our seminaries these days that you see?
Well, I think the primary challenge, Eric, these days is the way in which our seminaries are having to use a word that we've all learned over the last couple of years, pivot into a kind of curriculum that really addresses where the kinds of contexts that our students are going to be moving into, and particularly for me, what is the role of the sermon? What is the role of preaching now, especially when we've gone to online and online worship? What are people wanting out of the sermon? What do they need out of the sermon? And I was on sabbatical last year and working on a couple of projects, and came back in the fall and taught preaching residentially. And I said to my students, I said, I really don't know if I have any idea what I'm doing right now in teaching you preaching, because that's how much things have shifted over the last couple of years. So that main challenge of recognizing how is it that we prepare students to move into that lingering trauma of the last couple of years, and how is it that we speak a word of, given your podcast, a word of hope in a time of trauma, in a time of uncertainty. And so that's what we're really working on at the seminary, and how do we do that in a very intentional way? And it's a challenge. It really is a challenge.
And do it all in 5 to 10 minutes. There
Exactly.
you are. I mean, I was at a gathering of pastors the other day, and a senior pastor of a congregation, a person said that his new goal is to have 5-minute sermons, and because and especially online, if we talk that the average YouTube viewer is 11 minutes total.
Exactly.
That all of our worship services online are more than 11 minutes, but so
right.
So are you also have you pivoted to also help pastors understand some of the technical stuff they're going to have to do that they never had to do before?
A little bit, but what we're finding is that we're just all kind of learning together, and I think probably the biggest challenge that I speak into in my role, some of the technical stuff they figure out on their own, and they have technical support, which is really fantastic. But I've been talking more about the way in which something like this, a Zoom interview, the way in which that creates a kind of community of proclamation. And that, how is it that they're gathering people during the week in ways that they maybe weren't able to do before, maybe gathering around the text for Sunday in Bible studies, having different kinds of conversations that we just haven't been able to facilitate in the past. And that to what extent more people are kind of around the sermon or a part of the sermon, because there is a different and new kind of engagement on a regular basis with the passage and with people that's not limited to coming to the building, if that makes sense. And so that's been we've been talking a lot about that, and the way in which we can involve more people in our congregations, in our sermon preparation. And that's been exciting. And the other thing we've been talking about too in my class is, how do we think about what we really focus on in preaching is incarnation and embodiment. And how does that change when you're in this kind of modality? And but yet really focusing on the promise of the incarnation, that the Word became flesh, no matter where and how that personhood or that flesh is. And so those have been the two primary, less about technical stuff, because that's like way above my pay grade. But really focusing on some of the theological aspects of where we are, and how do we tend that theology faithfully in these new modalities of doing what we do.
Well, and I trust that many of your students who are younger than you and I are will come to seminary with technical skills that we never had coming to
I
seminary.
trust that too.
And so you're not one of those people that's saying, oh, we need to dump this stuff online and get back to just being in person. I didn't hear that at all.
No, I think there's no going back, and nor should there be back. I think we're just and to what extent there's so much more possibility in this. I mean, I think it was the fall of 20, when we were, in the middle of the pandemic, I was able to do a Bible study with a Presbyterian church outside of Detroit for 5 weeks in a row. Now, there's no way I could have done that pre-pandemic, or we wouldn't even thought of that, right?
Yeah.
And it was an absolute joy to be with them 5 weeks in a row in this community, in this congregation that I had preached there once, and then to continue that relationship. So, and I think the kind of access that this has provided, a way in which you are bringing the God's word to people who can't get to church, who are homebound, or in some kind of capacity that they're not able to come to the sanctuary. And it really, I think it really does underscore the premise of the word became flesh and dwelt among us. That the word became flesh and tabernacled or tented among us. And that tabernacle, back from the Old Testament and the wilderness wanderings, that tenting and tabernacling was movable, right? That was and God went where the people were. That was the promise. And to what extent we're kind of reliving that or redoing that again. And I think there's just real promise in that and real hope in that.
I find that too, and real excitement. And, we redefine what a congregation is too.
Exactly.
I have people that, like every other congregation, who left during the pandemic, but haven't left the congregation. And there's no reason. My council president's in Ohio. And because of technology, and he's really a technological guru, he can do almost anything he could do here in person.
Exactly.
And fascinating, well, as you said earlier, what does embodiment mean? What does incarnation mean in this environment? And to say that no to all that is at best missing a whole ton of opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really do think that we are, I've been doing some workshops online for pastors that that would have never crossed my mind before. And I'm able to connect with preachers literally like all over the world when I do these workshops. And it's just and to reconnect with people, for me, it's been a true joy to have these opportunities to gather, of course, via on Zoom, but to gather with these people and walk alongside them in their preaching, in their faithful preaching, has really been a blessing to me. And when I couldn't go anywhere, and of course wasn't invited anywhere, I've had real joy and blessing during the pandemic in those encounters.
Yeah. Well, as you've seen from looking at some of our program, I mean, I've been able to interview people. I interviewed a few weeks ago. I interviewed Mitri Rahib in Bethlehem, not Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but Bethlehem.
That's fantastic. Yes.
And I've interviewed Bishop Manid from the Holy Lands and people all over the world because you can.
Yeah.
And it's really quite amazing.
It is.
Well, you've hinted at this, but where do you find hope in your life and your work at the seminary?
Well, I find hope in the way in which we are creating new kinds of community and new kinds of conversation, and those places of dialogue that we haven't had before, and gathering people around the table, if you will, that haven't been able to be at the same table. And that I find a lot of hope in that in my particular call at the seminary. I also find hope in my students who keep coming to seminary, knowing the challenges and living the challenges the last couple of years of ministry, and what does ministry mean and what does preaching mean, and yet there they are, listening to God's call, answering God's call, not at all having all the answers. And not about, I need to get this ministry thing right or correct, but really carrying the conversation of what does it mean to be faithful in ministry? And that's, I find an incredible amount of hope in that they're coming with that kind of spirit of how do we do this faithfully? How do we do this that is answering this call, and really putting aside the idea of we got to get this right, and we've got to, this is, and there's one size fits all. And so a kind of curiosity and an openness to what's possible, and a trust in the Spirit, that the Spirit is at work, and she's moving, and she's inspiring and breathing new life perhaps into ministries. And so that's where I find my hope in what I do, and why I keep doing it. And I know that will continue to inspire me as things shift and change as we move forward in this, and they will.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. If people want to find out more about Luther Seminary, it's luthersem.edu, I believe, correct?
Yes, correct. Yep.
And that's actually how they can find a way to be in touch with you if they wish also.
Absolutely. Yes.
But the festival of homiletics.org is also the site for the event.
And I would also point people to workingpreacher.org.
Workingpreacher.org. Folks, if you want to have some Bible study on your own, workingpreacher.org reflects on the text for the coming Sunday, but actually if you drill down, as they say, a little bit more, you can find reflections on the text for all Sundays from past years. So,
that's right.
So it's a very helpful site.
And enterthebible.org. And we'll put a plug in that for that, Eric, too. That's a site from Luther Seminary that's like everything you want to know about the Bible and biblical books. So lots of resources for your people at Luther Seminary, and they're always invited to be in touch with me. And yeah, so we need all the resources we can get, right, to think about faith together.
That's wonderful. Enter the Bible sounds like it'd be a resource that would be really helpful for lay people.
Absolutely. Yep, it is. It's background themes, outlines, theologies about all the books in the Bible. Wonderful. So if you have this like urge, this desire to know everything you can about Obadiah, that's the place.
Okay.
Habakkuk, because I know that everybody's been dying to know about Habakkuk and Obadiah.
Okay, so I invite our viewers to look up and find out who those people are.
Right.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Karoline, for being with us today. This has been Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church. Our guest today has been the Rev Dr Karoline Lewis, who is professor of preaching at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Thank you for being with us, Karoline.
It was great to be with you, Eric. Thanks so much.
So tune in again next week when we have another guest who will be talking about this theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters, and we believe in a God of hope.